In late December 2025, the PLA Navy surrounded Taiwan with nearly 100 warships in an exercise called Justice Mission, and Beijing called it a show of dominance. It wasn't. What China actually did was hand the United States and its allies the clearest operational intelligence they'd had in years, and Washington used every second of it. Let's give China credit where it's due. Justice Mission wasn't a bluff. The PLA Navy deployed nearly 100 surface combatants, multiple submarine elements, and land-based missile forces in a coordinated envelope around Taiwan, the largest naval exercise the region had seen in a generation. Beijing's message was deliberate and unmistakable. We can close this strait whenever we choose. On paper, the formation looked like exactly the kind of anti-access area denial architecture China had spent 2 decades building toward. Layered missile coverage, electronic warfare assets pushed forward, surface action groups positioned to deny the U.S. Navy lateral movement. If you were watching from a distance, it looked like a mature, capable force executing a plan. The problem is what happened when a U.S. carrier strike group, that's 11 warships moving as one integrated weapons system, held its position and did not blink. Because what the confrontation revealed, almost immediately, was that the gap between China's doctrine on paper and its execution under real pressure is significantly wider than Beijing had calculated. The coordination failures were not subtle. Multiple planned surface groups operating in the outer envelope showed response lags when U.S. assets began repositioning, reaction windows that stretched long enough to matter in any actual engagement. The command and control architecture that looks clean in a scripted exercise started showing friction the moment it had to process a peer adversary that was actively maneuvering, actively jamming, and actively collecting. China's anti-access doctrine was designed to keep the U.S. Navy out of a defined operating zone. It was not stress-tested for what happens when the U.S. Navy refuses to leave that zone and starts gathering data instead. There was a specific moment, and this is the detail that keeps appearing in assessments of the exercise, where planned surface units in the eastern sector failed to maintain coherent formation discipline during a U.S. repositioning maneuver. The gap that opened wasn't catastrophic, but it was visible, it was persistent, and it was recorded. In a real engagement, that kind of seam doesn't stay theoretical for long. The deeper problem is doctrinal. China's anti-access strategy was built around the assumption that American political will would fracture before American military capability did, that the U.S. would hesitate, pull back, and give Beijing the operational space it needed. Justice Mission was supposed to demonstrate that the cost of intervention was prohibitive. Instead, it demonstrated something Beijing did not intend to demonstrate: that when a U.S. carrier strike group holds its ground, significant portions of the plan's coordination architecture struggle to adapt in real time. The bluff, and it was a bluff dressed as a demonstration of force, got called. Think about what that means for the entire strategic logic China had constructed. 2 decades of investment in anti-ship missiles, in electronic warfare, in submarine expansion, all of it premised on the idea that the threat alone would be enough to make the U.S. recalculate. Justice Mission was supposed to be the moment that threat became undeniable. Instead, it became the moment the U.S. and its allies got a live-fire look at exactly where the seams are. The operational failure was damaging on its own, but here's what makes it genuinely consequential. The moment China's coordination problems became observable, they stopped being China's private vulnerability and became Washington's working intelligence. And Washington didn't sit on that intelligence. What happened in the weeks after Justice Mission, the speed and the specificity of the Allied response, is the part of this story that Beijing is still trying to process. When the U.S. carrier strike group held its position and China's formation started showing those coordination gaps, did that change how you see the PLA Navy's real readiness? Drop your answer in the comments below. Because what Washington did with that intelligence in the weeks after is where this gets even more interesting. Now, within weeks of Justice Mission ending, the strategic blowback started arriving, and it arrived fast enough that Beijing could not have missed the connection. The Japan-Philippines Reciprocal Access Agreement, which went into effect in September 2025, had been moving through diplomatic channels for months. But the moment Justice Mission's imagery hit the airwaves, the encirclement maps, the blockade rehearsal zones, the propaganda graphics depicting arrows converging on Taiwan, the political resistance to deeper Allied integration collapsed almost overnight. Japan and the Philippines had just watched China rehearse exactly the kind of operation that would cut both of them off. The calculus shifted. What had been a gradual defense deepening became something more urgent. By early 2026, Australia, Japan, the Philippines, and the United States were holding 4-nation defense ministerial meetings, issuing joint statements expressing what they called serious concern about China's destabilizing actions, Language that specific from that many capitals simultaneously does not happen without a shared sense of threat that someone just made undeniable. Then Balikatan 2026 arrived in late April. 17,000 personnel from the Philippines, Japan, and the United States trained together across the northern Philippines. The same geographic corridor that Justice Mission had identified, implicitly, as the outer edge of China's intended operational zone. Japan's defense minister attended in person and watched the Type 88 missile system fire in live conditions. That is not a coincidence of scheduling. That is an alliance publicly rehearsing the answer to a question China publicly asked. Indo-Pacific repositioned assets. Basing agreements in the Philippines tightened. The AUKUS framework, already moving, gained fresh political momentum because Justice Mission had just handed every skeptical legislator in Canberra and London a visual argument they didn't have to construct themselves. China had built it for them. And here is the part Beijing clearly did not anticipate: the silence afterward. Xi Jinping's New Year's address on December 31st made no mention of Justice Mission. Not one word about the exercise that the PLA's own spokesperson had called a full test of integrated joint operations capabilities. An operation of that scale, framed as a demonstration of dominance, and the man who ordered it didn't reference it in his year-end address. That absence is louder than any press release. When a government that runs triumphalist messaging as a matter of institutional habit goes quiet about something it just did, it is because the internal assessment of what that something achieved does not match the external framing. Beijing knows the coordination gaps were visible. Beijing knows the Allied response was faster and more coordinated than the exercise was supposed to produce. The silence is the tell. So here is the verdict, stated plainly. China challenged U.S. naval dominance in the Taiwan Strait to demonstrate that the cost of intervention was prohibitive. Instead, it demonstrated where its own command and control architecture fractures under pressure. It handed U.S. and allied intelligence services a live operational data set they could not have purchased. It accelerated the Japan-Philippines security relationship, deepened four-nation defense integration, gave Indo-Pacific a political justification for every force posture shift it already wanted to make, and produced an allied military exercise, Balikatan 2026, that was explicitly designed around the operational problem Justice Mission had just revealed. China wanted to make the Taiwan Strait look like its territory. What it actually did was make every nation within striking distance of that strait move closer together and closer to the fight. Beijing overplayed its hand, the table saw it, and the pot went to Washington. Subscribe for more analysis like this and watch the next one on screen.